Haley Starr is a small-town farmer girl whose life is uprooted in the span of a single day. All of the adults in town are replaced by strange doppelgangers, and there's more to suggest that they may not even be human. All the while, Haley must team up with her best friend Elizabeth, the local wizard Neil who works at the arcade, and even an Egyptian goddess, along with a few US Marshals for good measure. It's up to them to face this dire invasion. It's their problem, and they're gonna deal with it their way. This is Haley Starr, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us, and we'll go ahead and give our thoughts on the book. I'm joined with Billy Bob Sack here tonight. First off, we're gonna be going over what we liked, disliked, as well as a few of our extraneous thoughts on the book. So first off, I guess we'll go ahead and talk about what we liked. Billy, what are a few things that kind of struck you immediately off the bat with Haley Starr Bad Kitty? One of the first things I found was the book has a really good establishing tone. That's kind of what I noticed first off, anyway.
I also noticed that the way he handles putting in exposition was done pretty good.
Yeah,
Besides, like, his art.
it can be a little tell don't show at times, but it's rare. I think for the most part, it's pretty smooth in how it's actually added into the book. I think the descriptions for the most part were very colorful and elaborate without getting too distracting.
Right.
I did think at times it got a little heavy on the exposition side of it, but it still wasn't too bad about it. For the most part, the tone feels pretty light and fun, and it kind of makes me think of a video game at several points. I don't know if that was kind of something you also got while reading it. Maybe it was just my own personal impressions.
Well, the author literally told us that it was originally supposed to be a video game.
I know, but
Shifted to
if we're
negative.
taking it on its own terms, like the feeling you get while you're reading. I know we've actually spoken a bit with the author himself, Mr. Wrangler, otherwise known as Frequency Studios, but even taking that out of the equation, I do get that video game feel while reading it. And it's certainly not
Yes.
a bad thing either.
When we get to the negatives, there is one I'll point out that is very video gamey. For the most part, it's all done pretty good. There's one part.
Another thing I really liked was how the profanity is kind of subtly censored. In a word, there is profanity in this book, but right before the characters can say it, the main character, Haley, will usually pipe up and say, "Hey," right before they can complete that sentence. I thought it was a nice way of keeping things pretty family friendly and also keeping everything somewhat real and grounded at the same time. It's not really sidestepping around it, it's set up pretty naturally from what I saw. It gives a little bit of background as to why she does it, kind of like with her father and being sort of like the single parent, and where he got really heavy into drinking and profanity at one point. But so it's a nice way of kind of explaining how this is staying a little more family friendly, but also making it feel real at the same time.
I do enjoy his world building and stuff that he's got set up in this book with different realities and densities and stuff, and how there's kind of Illuminati group as well.
Yeah, there's multiverses in this book. They're not called alternate realities. They're called different densities. So it's like the actual frequency at which matter reverberates in space-time. That is the different densities, and there's like different worlds and races of people built around that.
Also, the enemies like turn into goo, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, they turn into
I don't think
goo,
they
which
actually
is
kill
really...
anybody, or-
No, they don't strictly kill anybody. Whenever Haley and Elizabeth, Neil, and everybody else in this book, whenever they deal any significant amount of harm to any of their foes, since they're these aliens that I believe their name is cetaceans, they'll turn into goo because they're phasing into this reality through different vessels that are kind of like being given to them. They're not in their real bodies.
So like all the town villagers that they kidnap, they're creating clones of them. It does get a little bit confusing because at a certain point he just uses like 3 different adults' names. I think you need to have a little bit more variety of the townsfolks.
So this will be a con I get into more here in a bit whenever we go in a bit deeper into my gripes. We'll get into like some of the minor characters that I had a little bit of a problem with, but overall I do like how things are kept pretty family friendly, and there's an in-world explanation for how that's actually being done. It's not just being danced around for the most part, it's actually pretty clever. I also wanted to mention how the cats are handled in this book, because there are cats, quite a few of them actually. So all of this ties back into a character. If you're a fan of Egyptian mythology, you'll know as Bastet. So for those of you who don't know, Bastet is the Egyptian goddess of cats and protection, and she's acting as sort of like a guardian figure at certain points for Haley and Elizabeth, without getting into really any spoilers. I thought it was a nice way of bringing in a lot of cats into the story, because I mean, it's a nice way of kind of keeping it fun at the same time. There's also several bits in the writing where meow is actually used as part of the dialogue itself, which I just think is really endearing.
For the second book, I don't know how he's gonna have to research some more cat patterns and give some unique ones, because every cat is distinct look and shit and personality.
Yeah, and that's one thing I really like about it, is every cat is a character. It's a minor character, but it works all the same because they're each given a description, and they technically do have a role in a conversation, so it's pretty fun whenever they are on screen. I also think overall, keeping this pretty high level, because at the end of the day, I would recommend this book. There is a really good emotional parallel that's going on between, I guess you could call it a bit of a death in the family with one of Haley's close relatives, I think it's her mother, and then how it's going on throughout the book, how she's dealing with that. It's a nice way of tying it in that happens later on, especially once she's kind of like starting to grow and learn what she can do with her powers.
She also has a potato gun that she shoots.
She does have a potato gun, and it's a pretty fucking cool potato gun. She can't just shoot potatoes, she also shoots like, what, magic blasts and stuff that she can shape into the form of animals?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty cool in its own right. I cannot lie. I really did enjoy that part. That little detail made it just that much more fun. I guess we can go ahead and talk about the major characters and also a bit of the world building as well. Overall, I thought Haley, Elizabeth, and Neil, those are kind of like your main roster of characters. They were all pretty likable to me. There wasn't too much that bothered me about any of them.
There's two other ones you're missing. The two agent dudes.
Are you talking about Logan O'Connor and I think his name is... I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head. Yeah, there wasn't too much that really bothered me about them. Calling back to sort of like the light censorship with profanity, some of Haley interrupting what they would be saying with like cursing did get on my nerves a little bit around the end, but that was still pretty... It was still pretty light overall. It didn't bother me too much. By the time it was starting to get on my nerves, the book was over.
But to be fair, it was keeping it consistent throughout the entire book.
It is consistent. I think it was only around the end where you started seeing it a little bit more frequent right around the end, but that was the only point where I actually started to get slightly annoyed. Then it was the climax, then the book was done. So I didn't mind it too much overall. I do like Haley and Elizabeth's overall journey as empaths. For this setting, they're both kind of like psychics in a sense. They do sort of have like this, I guess you could say it's sort of like this inner sense or this feeling where they can actually, kind of like the Force in a way, where they're actually sensing what's going on in the world around them. They can also manifest their powers in a different way. It's pretty loose overall, but it's also implied that Elizabeth is a bit more powerful than Haley too. Like Elizabeth is just naturally gifted at it.
Well, they can specifically feel emotions and intent and stuff as well.
Yeah, it's a nice little touch. There is one part later on that happens with... His full name is Logan O'Connor. I'll just call him Logan from here on out for brevity. They have a pretty deep connection because of this, for a few reasons, but that's one of them. They can actually feel each other's emotions and some of their past memories.
So I have the other two names. It's Gus, and Gentry is the old dude, like old alien dude in the spaceship.
That's right. I think it's Gus. He has quite a bit to do with them right around the end there. Gus is a pretty cool side character all in all. He isn't in the story too much, but what parts he is in, I do really like it.
Gus is the other one. Gentry's he's the bald one, isn't he?
I believe so. So there were 3 of them overall. So it's, let's see, Chuck, Gentry, and then Gus, I believe.
Yeah, Gentry was the old dude in the ship.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but I especially like that. I do like how the magic system is handled. It's pretty loose. It doesn't go into too much depth saying like, oh, if you have this amount of spell slots or whatever, you can do this, or if you have this much MP, you can do that. None of that. It's kept pretty simple, pretty easy to understand. I thought it was a nice touch overall. Yeah, it's just really fun, especially when it comes to the action scenes. Like, there's a nice bit of variety there as well. So, back to her and Logan, their actual friendship, because to a certain degree, Haley and Logan do become friends. I like that there's a bit of a difference between how he knows her in the moment as a child versus him also knowing her a bit later on in his universe, because certain characters are from alternate universes, densities.
Well, specifically, those three are from different universe, and specifically in the at a different time period. When I think it's 2018 is where they come from, where Haley and Elizabeth are 30 years old.
Yeah, and this is like the late 90s whenever this book is happening.
Yes, and the main villain is also from that timeline as well.
Yeah, so what did you think overall about, I believe his name is Ankh Hume? I thought he was a pretty serviceable villain overall. I'm not going to say that I thought he was the deepest villain out there, but I do think he made a good obstacle for Haley and Elizabeth. He was a good threat.
I'm going to kind of disagree. I kind of felt like he didn't have enough to do, and when he did kind of show up, he just got his ass kicked, and he's kind of in the background.
To me, he felt like he was a bit of an obstacle in a way. He's like an obstacle villain, which can work. It can also not, just depending on what you're personally looking out of this. Like, for me, it's like, just so long as he's actually challenging them in some way, I think it's decently okay. But I do agree, I think a little bit more character could have been put in there. I think he needed just a little more to actually do, a little more to actually kind of like help flesh him out as a character. He was a little two-dimensional in my opinion.
Right.
Yeah, like, but I still really liked his visual design, all things considered. He sort of has this like vaguely serpent or dragon-like look with like wings and 6 legs or something. It's really neat.
I think it's 4 arms and like 2 legs and 4 arms is what he's got.
Yeah, I sort of see him as kind of like this big kind of like fantasy type, like chaotic monstrosity or alien type creature. A little bit of a mix there, but it's still pretty fun overall, I think. I didn't really have too much to like criticize there with the actual aliens and everything. There is quite a bit of world building overall in this book. It doesn't go too much in depth to actually make your head spin or anything, but it gives you a decent idea as to how much there is to like the different densities and also the empaths. The book gives you quite a bit to actually kind of like chew on while you're reading.
And then there was also Sabrina.
Oh yeah, Sabrina. So this is actually kind of going a bit into cons. I guess this is a good time to actually get into our gripes. My first one is, I think the overall encounter with Sabrina felt a little jarring. It kind of comes out of nowhere, and then before you can really get a feeling for who Sabrina is, it's done with. She's kind of out of the picture.
Right.
Yeah, it's a small thing overall, but it did kind of feel a little jarring to me whenever I was reading through it. I went, do I know this character? I feel like I should. And then by the time I was kind of getting familiar, she was kind of like mysteriously gone. I don't know what her overall role in the greater story is going to be. I'm imagining that Wrangler is going to have a bit more for her to do in book 2. That's my personal guess.
I'm trying to think back to her.
It's a pretty small encounter overall. I believe Haley's she's kind of like on a bridge of scaffolding or something. She's deep within the enemy base whenever they're actually meeting, and it's like a brief encounter. I think Haley's kind of remarking like how she's sort of like pretty in kind of like an inspirational sort of way, and then Sabrina just kind of like scoffs at her. They connect memories at some point. Is that right?
Yeah, I think Elizabeth helps her because she doesn't want to be a killer, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, what little we do get of Sabrina in this book, I did like her quite a bit. She's very much a very small side character, though. I do want to see more of her.
Now, one of the other cons I have is I think the pacing overall is pretty good.
Yeah, I agree.
Until the middle part.
Middle part has a few problems. It can drag a little bit.
So the whole thing I was saying, like, it's kind of a negative with the video game aspect, and you can kind of see it. You know, think of Red Dead Redemption 1. In Red Dead Redemption 1, you spend the first part of the game in Alamo and stuff and all that. And then you spend most of the game in Mexico, and that's pretty much what the sewer part in this book was. Where you spend a way too much time there.
Yeah, it feels like a bit of a dungeon crawl in certain places, even though this is more of like a sci-fi book. The best way I would describe it is a dungeon crawl. She's going from room to room, level to level, trying to avoid enemies, finding different hazards. That's kind of the feeling I get from it. Feels like she's infiltrating the enemy base, and it's taking just a bit too long.
And this is a positive and a con. I do like when he switches to different POVs. However, there's too much in between time for us to switch. One way to break up that long dungeon thing was to have a POV switch to Elizabeth, with Neil, with doing her training stuff, would help break that up to where it's not as long. Because all the POV switch was, what was the bald one? I think it was him and the other marshal. It was switching between those and Elizabeth, but they're all in the same place with the same descriptions and stuff,
Was it Gentry? Is that his name?
No, Gentry's the old man, the bald one.
Gus. Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah, Gus. That's right.
It was only POV switches were switching to them at the same place. And I kind of wish he did switch back to Elizabeth. And I wish he did incorporate more chapters or switching to Haley's father is kidnapped. Because you get like one POV towards the beginning, and you pretty much don't get any more.
This is probably my biggest criticism with the book overall, is that I would say that the action and exploration bits, this is kind of feeding into what you were talking about with the middle part of the book feeling a bit slow. The action and exploration can feel just a little confusing sometimes. It's like the descriptions can be a little too lacking at points. It's not always there, it's just whenever you see it, it's enough to make you pause for a second. It's still not terrible though. It only made me do it a few times, like 3 or 4 times at the most.
So going off of that, my problem with the action scenes, I start losing placement of where I'm at and what's going on.
Yeah, I think a few environmental details just to give you an idea of where Haley, Elizabeth, and their attackers are standing, or just kind of like maybe a small description of the room or something. I think that would have fixed that.
It's not that. I mean, he set the place where we're at. It's just once they start moving and doing stuff, at a certain point, he starts losing me. Case in point, there is a fight between, they're like on the, I think like container, like in the air, and they're jumping between them, and she's fighting the main villain on there. At a certain point, I start losing where they're at, like their footing, what's going on, where the characters are located in this battle.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. In frankness, this is something that a lot of books struggle with, and especially with the action scenes. It's getting a solid idea of who's standing where, like what's actually happening in the moment, where it's like enough for your mind to fill in the blanks with what's going on. It's not every action scene though. There's a few early on in the book that I had no problem with. I think it's a small little fight that Haley and Elizabeth are having with a few of the cetaceans in like a playground or whatever. I thought that was a really fun action scene. And it was small too, but it was pretty easy to follow and I had a lot of fun reading it.
Right, it's not every one of them I'm just saying that specific example or chapter, I forgot which one, it's towards the later part of the book. I did lose what was happening.
Yeah, and that's fair. The only thing I'll say as well is at first I did get a little confused whenever it introduces kind of like Gentry, Gus, and Chuck. I don't think there was enough description there at the beginning for me to really differentiate them. There's like whole conversations between them as well. It confused me a little bit there at first, but the further on the book went, the more I kind of like didn't have too much of a problem with it.
The problem is I think Haley and Elizabeth see them, and the problem is there's not really a clear distinction, them being salutations, they're looking for them, and then these marshals.
Right.
Exactly what's going on, and he was trying to keep it also a little bit mysterious. I think that's what he was going for.
I think a big part of it is the moniker. They're all called marshals, so at first it's really easy to kind of mix them all up a little bit because there isn't really a full distinction between the three of them at first. That changes over time.
Right.
Yeah. The last thing I'll note here is there's one point in the book that feels just a little too convenient for me. It's whenever Haley and Logan are traveling together. They're in the middle of the enemy base, underground, and I think it's more kind of out of happenstance. They just so happen to be nearby a portal that'll really deal like a vital blow against the cetaceans, kind of like going into the reality. Maybe it's just me, that felt a little too convenient for my taste.
I'm trying to remember.
It's a small bit in the book. It's not too big. Like, I'm not going to bring too much of a spotlight on it. It did bother me a little bit while I was reading. It was kind of one point in the book where I just sort of like put my finger down on it and I went, yeah, that feels a bit too convenient.
Yeah, I think I listed all my my cons. I didn't have that much problems with this book.
Yeah, like, I'm basically nitpicking at this point. For the most part, I didn't really have too many problems with it. I think my biggest problem was just some of the descriptions for action and them exploring. But other than that, a lot of it's just minor. Like, for the most part, I had a lot of fun reading this.
I know we're in the con section, but I did forget to put this in the pros. I did like the horror aspect with the creatures that were starting to hunt down Haley in the dungeon.
Yeah, that was pretty fun, actually.
I did like that. Like how he was setting up the atmosphere and the horror of it.
Yeah, I agree. It was a fun bit of horror. That's pretty much it I have for cons. So last thing I had was just a few other things that I kind of noted while I was reading. This is something I won't exactly list as a pro or a con strictly. This is definitely a book where there's a lot more pop culture references than you'll find in some other books. So kind of like I said, I'm a little bit in between on this. I have a feeling that some people won't mind this, other people might have a problem with it. For me, it's a bit of both because there's some bits in this book where it's really clever. There's like a won't back down reference at one point, which I thought was pretty fun. It fit in well with like the character, especially with Haley. She's a big kind of like media nerd, so it really fits in. What do you think about that, Billy?
I have no problem with any of that. I don't think any of it was too on the nose where it gets a little bit cringy. None of that. I think mostly it was handled pretty good.
I don't know if it was just me. I think here in my notes, I have it listed on page 143. I think there was a 420 joke or something that I ended up reading across. I saw it, I caught it. I thought it was pretty funny at the same time.
Where was it?
It was like page 143. That's what I have listed down here.
Oh, you're talking about counter was at 420 to 509.
Yeah, that's it. I noted it. I'm like, I feel like that's a joke. Maybe I'm wrong, but it felt like a joke to me.
May have been.
Also, clam chowder. That's all I'll have to say. Clam chowder is, whenever I came across it, I thought it was pretty funny just because where we talk with Wrangler a lot, he'll say clam chowder quite a bit. So when I saw that, it just made me chuckle.
Wasn't it in the prologue? Weren't they eating it in the prologue?
I think they were. It's also mentioned like right at the end of the book. It's like the last page or two, clam chowder is mentioned again. That was pretty much the only other things I had really to say about this. Other than that, I think we can go ahead and to the final verdict. Did you have anything else that kind of caught your eye while reading, Billy?
Oh, I'm forgetting all kinds of stuff. One more con, and this will be it.
All right.
So I said that I think the exposition and stuff, and then dealing out the how the magic system works and the world building. In my opinion, I thought it was really, really well done, except for one part.
What's that?
And it is in the POV chapter of the main villain, where he kind of just mumbles onto himself about his backstory, and it stuck out like a sore thumb because in the rest of this book, the way he deals it out to you, the information feels organic, feels natural, in my opinion. In that one chapter, it did not. It felt like someone was just telling me the backstory.
Yeah, and it kind of feeds into what I was saying a little while ago. There's certain parts of the book that can lean a little harder into telling and not showing. It's still very much the exception and not the rule. For the most part, it stays consistent about the actual rules, kind of like giving you an idea of what they can do without explicitly telling you at all times.
To me, it makes sense for Haley to start asking questions about this magic sense. You know, she's starting to learn this stuff. She just found out about it that day, you know? And then same thing with Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth, I think, was done really well because you had Neil, and Neil was teaching her. how to do it.
Yeah,
And
I
it's-
love that whole sequence with Elizabeth learning how to control her empathic powers. That whole bit was really fun to me.
Right, and that's why that one part really sticks out to me in this book. I forgot to mention it, but it didn't ruin it. The book,
Yeah, yeah. I don't think any of the gripes we have, they put too big of a damper on our enjoyment while reading. Like, it's just minor things here and there overall. Like, that's pretty much it for the most part.
Right.
But yeah, overall, as for my final verdict for Haley Star Bad Kitty, honestly, this is a solid recommend to me. And I don't know about you, Billy. For me, for the most part, I had a really fun time reading this.
I give it a recommend for anyone, and I do think this book is appropriate for children.
Oh yeah, I agree. There is a bit of darker subject material, but it's nothing you wouldn't see in like a Pixar film. That's how I'd describe it.
Like, there's no gore. Like, when they kill they're not even killing them. When they destroy the shells are just turning into like green slime goo. I'd say this: if you can let your kid watch Goosebumps,
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
a-
that's a really good comparison, actually. Like, even like the horror and everything, it doesn't go past Goosebumps level. I don't even think it reaches the same level as Goosebumps.
Now, even if you're not a kid, I still recommend this book. It's just good.
Yeah, it's just fun. It's really fun. Yeah, overall, if I was to give this a rating, like, out of 10, I would probably give it a 7 out of 10. Like I said, I do have a few problems, and it's not quite to masterpiece level for me, but it was still just a really fun, solid read. So a 7 out of 10 is where I would put it in kind of like my overall enjoyment.
I'd probably put it at a 7.5 because I do think the exposition was handled mostly very good.
That is fair. And yeah, my own personal rating scale, I'm just doing whole numbers here, so it's like 7 or 8. It's somewhere in that range. So yeah, it's just really fun, really easy to follow for the most part. Really likable characters. I love Haley. The cats are pretty adorable in this book. Yeah, overall, it's a solid recommendation. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out Haley Star Bad Kitty in the description below, also available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. You can also find my own novella, Steel and Stormbright, The Curse of the Star Raids. Until next time, friends, I bid you a cordial squeak squeak, and God bless.